Okay, so we have a sikha from Achron Shel Pesach, the final day of Pesach, Tafshin Yud Beis, 1952. Achron Shel Pesach was always the last day of Pesach when the Rebbe would do the Moshiach, so that was the time when the Rebbe always spoke sikhas having to do with Moshiach. And here he brings in with something that has to do with the beginning of the Seder. Chag Pesach, Yeshnam Gimel and Yom. In Pesach, there are three aspects, three components. Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. There is the Korban Pesach, there is the Matzah, and there is the Maror. Interestingly enough, all of these things are things that we eat. So it's three things, and they're all having to do with food. And we say by the Haggadah, as we know, we say that whoever didn't mention these three things by this Seder, he didn't really fulfill his obligations. It's important of the entire Haggadah part of the Seder to emphasize and bring out these three things of Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. Pesach, the Haggadah goes on to explain, because Hashem skipped over the houses of our forefathers. Matzah was there was insufficient time for the dough of our forefathers to rise and become chametzik. Maror, why do we eat maror? Al shum shemereru hamitzrim as chaya v'seinu, because the Egyptians made bitter the lives of our forefathers. So now the Rebbe says, of all these three things that are like very crucial and vital components in the Seder, there is a difference between the centrality of it in the present time. The primary thing of these three things that remain in this day and age, nowadays, when there is no Beis Hamikdash, is matzah. That is, of all those three things, that is the most primary one. He's going to explain why. The Korban Pesach was only applicable in the time when the Beis Hamikdash stood. Korban Pesach, and the times that the Beis Hamikdash they used to offer the Korban Pesach, as opposed to these days, Korban Pesach that we don't offer, we do not bring a Korban Pesach. Another thing is, when it comes to maror, the bitter herbs, even though we do eat the bitter herbs, not like the Korban Pesach that we don't have any Korban Pesach these days, it's only a rabbinic obligation to eat maror. Matzah, even these days, it's obligations from the Torah. So there's really three tiers. There's matzah, which is a Torah obligation even at the present. There's maror, which is only an obligation with the Rabbanon, because the Torah obligation is only when we have all of the things like Pesach and matzah. And the Korban Pesach it's not even a rabbinic obligation. It doesn't really exist in the physical sense. So central, therefore, to all of this and the core of all of this is the mitzvah of all these three things, matzah. The Rebbe says, when you understand, even as I'm saying, since maror is because the Egyptians made the life of our forefathers bitter, it indicates exile. It's because it was insufficient, the dough of our forefathers, to become comforted until the King of Kings Hashem came revealed upon them and he redeemed them. And what is in other words, Moira ala Geulah, matzah indicates redemption. So maror indicates exile, and matzah indicates redemption. So it's seemingly flipped around the importance of what we do by the Seder. How is it possible that the times that the Beis Hamikdash stood, so then maror, that indicated the Geulah was a Torah obligation, like we said. When we had the Korban Pesach, and the Beis Hamikdash stood, then maror was a Torah obligation. When it comes to the time of exile, Murder is all about the bitterness of exile. That's when Murder is only a rabbinic obligation. Same as even more so, Murder Bisman Agolus Midrabanon. Not only is Murder these days in the time of Golus Derabanon, Vedavkim Matzah, which indicates Geulah, he gam Bisman Agolus Minatoida. How is it specifically Matzah, which indicates redemption, like we said before? Why was there the dough didn't rise? Because they were being rushed out into the redemption without any sufficient time for it to rise. So how can it be that matzah, which indicates redemption, is also in the time of Golus, Minatoida? When the time of Golus is specifically connected with Murder. But not with matzah, that the theme of matzah is Geulah. How does that fit in? These two things. It seems to be just the opposite. The thing that should be talking about Geulah should be left for the times that are based on Mikdash, and maybe Midrabanon will do matzah these days. And Morer, which indicates Golus, which that's what we're experiencing now, should be Minatoida, should be a Torah obligation. The Rebbe explains, Yuvan Bahegdim Abir B'chlos in Yitzias Mitzrayim. This should be understood by first prefacing the general idea of going out of Mitzrayim. The general idea of the concept of the leaving of Mitzrayim. Though it's only something that is temporary, the going out of Mitzrayim, it's also a beginning and it's an empowerment for all matters that follow it, until the future redemption. Allah Namar, concerning the future redemption, it says, Mitzrayim, like your days going out of the land of Mitzrayim, I will show you wonders. In other words, which is more like my father-in-law, the Frierdiker Rebbe explained, Yetzias Mitzrayim, he has the going out of Mitzrayim is the beginning for all the redemptions until the true and complete redemption. The Pratis Yosef, more specifically, the revelation of Hashem that took place when the Eden went out of Mitzrayim. Though it's a very lofty revelation, the King of Kings Hashem was revealed upon them and redeemed them. So that is a powerful revelation. This is only a temporary thing. But following the revelation that took place in Moshiach's time, there had to begin an avodah that you should count for you 7 weeks. The idea of Shvira Soimer. Through that specifically, did the Yidden reach the specific purity that they should be ready for the giving of the Torah? Similar to a woman who's in her nida state, she becomes purified for her husband through the counting of 7 days. In a similar vein, we, Klal Yisrael, are Hashem's wife and Hashem's bride, and we count 7 weeks like the Zohar says. So that is what we say about the revelation of Mitzrayim. It was a powerful revelation. It's an amazing revelation, but it was only something that's temporary. On the other hand, after Mitzrayim, though the revelation of going on Mitzrayim was only temporary, it's also the beginning of the giving of the Torah. For those that were here by our Monday Shiur, we spoke about this concept as well, how it's the process of Matan Torah began with going out of Mitzrayim. Like Moshe Rabbeinu was told by the burning bush, he says, when you will take this nation out of Mitzrayim, you will serve Hashem on this mountain, which indicates that there is a connection and it's part of a process. Going out of Mitzrayim is to lead to Matan Torah. Even Shef Shabbos, Lamatan Torah. Toil Gam Achron idea of this Pirsaim and Nas side the Geulah is Mitzrayim Dafke because the capability, the possibility of the giving of the Torah, including also the preparation for it, which comes about through the Avodah Pirsaim, occurred through the revelation of going out of Mitzrayim. So that was all and began all with going out of Mitzrayim. So we know that the revelation of Yetzias Mitzrayim has to do with the giving of the Torah. If it takes it a step further, Matan Torah, we know, is primarily the revelation and the giving of the revealed part of the Torah. The concealed part of the Torah, the inner part of the Torah, is primarily going to be given, like the Matan Torah of it, is going to be revealed when Moshiach comes. So Yetzias Mitzrayim, just like going out of Mitzrayim, is a preparation for the giving of the revealed part of the Torah, which took place 7 weeks later. So too, Yetzias Mitzrayim is a preparation and a lead-in and a source for the beginning of the giving of the inner part of the Torah, the Pnimius Torah Mashiach's time. Let's see it inside. You say them as even more so. It's not only the revelation of going out of Mitzrayim. It's not just the beginning of the giving of the Torah, the revealed part of the Torah. Gam has cholos matan Torah, the pnimius haTorah, because God lost the law base. Beginning of the giving of the Torah, of the inner part of the Torah that will become revealed in the future time. When Moshiach comes. Though the revelation of going out of Mitzrayim was not the true and complete redemption. Because after going out of Mitzrayim, there were other goals. Like this expression of Chazal concerning the redemption of Purim, we are still servants of Achashverosh. It is the beginning and is the empowerment for the true and complete redemption that has no goals following it. Then, when Moshiach comes, will be the perfection and the completion of Matan Torah that began after Yetzias Mitzrayim, but it doesn't reach its completion and perfection until Moshiach comes, because when Moshiach comes will be the revelation of the inner part of the Torah. Therefore, move on, the whole idea of the commemoration and remembering of going out of Mitzrayim, which the epitome of that commemoration and memory of going out of Mitzrayim takes place at the Seder night, even though many things are Zechel L'Tzias Mitzrayim. In Shabbos davening, we say Zechel L'Tzias Mitzrayim. In many mitzvahs, the Torah says, remember that you were slaves in Mitzrayim, and so on and so forth. But the height of the time when we do the Zechel L'Tzias Mitzrayim is by the Seder. So that remembrance of going out of Mitzrayim is not just remembering the past, but it's about enabling the future. We've seen this koyach l'chlos maseinu eseinu falls mamesh chagolos, an empowerment for the general actions and service throughout the duration of the time of Golas. By days of boim seif l'gula asida, that through this eventually we will arrive at the future redemption. It says nois dalid yesh loima gedugmas beizak tzovis shebitzias Mitzrayim. Similar to the two extremes that we find in going out of Mitzrayim. First level is lefi shabelvad. On the one hand, we say going out of Mitzrayim is only temporary. It wasn't the complete thing. It wasn't the entire thing. On the other hand, we say v'gam has kol d'chol yom shalachar. We say on the other hand that Mitzrayim, going out of Mitzrayim, is the beginning and starts the entire process that will eventually occur, including the completion of it and the conclusion of it with the Geulah. So these two extremes, but sinu gam b'Korban Pesach. We also find in the Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach eine kara bisman hazeh shebeis hamikdash eine kain. The Korban Pesach is not offered these days that the Beis Hamikdash does not stand. The Bezem Mudgish, in this it's emphasized, Geulah the Pesach ain't el. This indicates that Pesach, the carbon Pesach, is only a temporary thing. Just like going out of Mitzrayim was only a temporary thing. The same thing, the carbon Pesach, the fact that it doesn't go on, there was a hefsek, there was a time that it ceased. Carbon Pesach is only a temporary thing. Apple became still in all, but Sinu ba'achroinim kama deis shegam bezman hazeh she'ein beis mikdash kaim muter lahakar carbon Pesach. We find in the Achronim many views that also these days that the Beis Hamikdash is not standing. Under certain conditions, one is permitted to offer a carbon Pesach. They're very interesting. It's an exceptional type of carbon that seems to be allowed to be brought without an actual Beis Hamikdash. Like it's explained at length, the detailed and visual discussion about it, if this is the case or not. And this was also discussed that the Rebbe said when they first, after the 6-day war, and the old city of Shalim was free, the Rebbe encouraged the Eden and the Bavashers followed through on this, not to be in the area of the old city, etc., or close by on Pesach, because there may be an obligation to actually bring a carbon Pesach even without a Beis Hamikdash. Since then, the Rebbe said that we have ceded control to that area by giving it to the Muslims, etc., and letting them control it. So therefore, it's not anymore an issue. But there was literally a practical concern about bringing the carbon Pesach as soon as the area of the Beis Hamikdash was freed from non-Jewish hands. Be that as it may, the very fact that the carbon Pesach still had a possibility to be brought, according to some opinions, even when the Beis Hamikdash was not standing. The Rebbe says, but this is emphasized, Geulah the Pesach was that the revelation of Pesach is the beginning for all matters following. Both the avodah that's in the time of exile. The Gam Oz Shayach in the carbon Pesach, like we just now said, even during exile, even when there's no Beis Hamikdash, there is still a possibility for carbon Pesach. And also, and primarily, its goal and its purpose in the future redemption. So the carbon Pesach, even though on the one hand it's temporary, just like we said about the going out of Geulah from Mitzrayim was temporary because afterwards we went back into Geulah. Still in all, the going out of Geulah from Mitzrayim began the process that leads us to the Geulah Siddha. Same thing, carbon Pesach is also on the one hand, just a temporary thing. It begins a process that will culminate in the future redemption. The Rebbe says, we know that on the first days of Pesach, we conclude and we say the entire holiday. Whereas the final days of Pesach, we only say half holiday. Why do we omit parts of Hallel on the second half of Pesach? Because we're still in Geulah. Let's see the second paragraph. Yet Shlomo could say, this is also the inner reason why we recite half a Hallel. According to the custom of Yidden. Minig Yisrael Torah, the custom of Yidden is considered halacha, is considered law. Therefore, therefore there's a discussion. Make a bracha when you recite half a Hallel. Do not make a bracha when you recite half a Hallel. Chabad has the custom, even though in many places we don't say a bracha when we recite half Hallel, but Chassidim would like, the expression is Chassidim would like under their breath recite the bracha. It was only usually the Chazan would recite the bracha. But again, that's all parenthetical. So this is the inner reason that Rebbe says for reciting Chatzi Hallel Achron Yom Rishon the Pesach. After the first days of Pesach, beginning with Chalamoid, going through the final days of Pesach, we only say a half a halal. Why is that? What's that type of transition? First days of Pesach, we say halal. The latter days of Pesach, we say only a half a halal. Gam la'achri agilu d'yetzias Mitzrayim lefisha, v'nimtzoyim adayim begolos, after the revelation of going out of Mitzrayim, which was temporary. How do we know it's temporary? Because we're presently still in Golos. We're still servants of Achashverosh. Skip the parentheses. We say Hallel. Why? Why do we say at least a half a Hallel? To draw down and to affect the Geulah in the time of Golos. So true, we only say a half a Hallel, but we don't avoid Hallel completely. We do say some Hallel. Why do we say some Hallel? Because we want to draw down and affect the Geulah also while being in a state of Golus, because that's the whole point. We're going from Yitzias Mitzrayim on the road to the Geulah Siddha, and the same thing as the Korban Pesach. Now he's going to go back to the initial question. Why the maror, which symbolizes bitterness of Golus, is something that's only a rabbinic obligation now during the time of Golus, and matzah that symbolizes the Geulah Mitzrayim now in Golus is min haTorah. It should be flipped around. It says, I say, according to this, we could also explain the both extremes. That's in maror and matzah. These days, there's a Torah obligation for matzah and not maror. Though the bitter herbs indicate golus, matzah indicates ala geula. So seemingly it should be the other way around, that now during the time of golus, the golus type of commemoration should be primary, and the Geulah type of commemoration should only be midrabanan. The Rebbe says, Ki it's just the opposite. That it's the very Geulah nature of matzah that forces us to say that min haTorah, and the very golus nature of maror that makes it midrabanan. The reason that in the time of golus there's no Torah obligation to eat maror, because the golus itself is maror. The golus itself is bitterness. And therefore, you don't need a reminder. You don't need to emphasize more the idea of golus through eating bitter herbs. If you're going to pile up and say that there is a Torah obligation of eating maror even in golus, that will bring you to total hopelessness, because the very experience of golus is already bitter. As opposed to the time when the Beis Hamikdash stood. There was a need and an obligation in Torah to eat maror, to awaken and to emphasize the remembrance of the redemption, to appreciate that we came out of exile. When you talk about redemption, you cannot understand the meaning and the advantage or the quality of it without knowing that there was something bitter. It's like, parents and grandparents used to tell the kids that what they went through in the war, and they didn't have any food to eat. Why did they tell them that? Because when a kid made a face when they saw the food on the table, it's because they didn't appreciate the food on the table. Yeah, every morning they wake up, there's bread on the table. Every morning they wake up, there's cereal, there's milk, there's juice, there's eggs, whatever. So you don't appreciate it because you don't know what it's like. Comes the parent or the grandparent and says, you know how difficult it was for us to get the bread during the war, and so on, and we never saw an egg. And what was the purpose in that? So that when we know about the difficulties to be able to have food that our parents or grandparents had, Then when we see a piece of bread on a table, it's not taken for granted. The same thing. When we're living in the time of Geulah, when we're in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, over there, to be able to appreciate what we are in, to be able to appreciate the Beis Hamikdash, to be able to appreciate the Geulah, there's a Torah obligation to eat maror, to appreciate the Geulah that we had. Because if you don't know about the bitterness in Mitzrayim, you're not going to appreciate the Geulah. So that's why in the time of Geulah, in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, maror was a Torah obligation. Whereas now, where we're experiencing the maror, the Torah doesn't obligate you in eating maror. The Chachamim did, so we don't forget those times that we ate the maror. Minat Torah. The Rebbe says we can add to this. Since the redemption out of Mitzrayim is only temporary, a redemption that Geulah followed it. This also expresses itself also in the eating of maror. That we said maror indicates Geulah in the time when the Beis Hamikdash stood, because there was always still the potential for Geulah. It was not yet a state of complete redemption. So therefore, since it was not a state of complete redemption, there had to be some type of reminder. You should know Geulah is like right there, possible to come jumping out at us. So that's why we have a Torah obligation to eat maror, whereas now in Geulah, no reminder is needed. We're experiencing the maror. On the other hand, the primary thing that now by the Seder that you need to have this emphasis in the time of Geulah is the remembrance of the redemption. That it gives power and empowerment to the general avoid in the time of exile, to be able to arrive at the future redemption. In other words, what's going to empower us to raise ourselves up out of a Geulah mentality and to look forward to the future redemption? That's remembering how the redemption took place. Eating matzah is a commemoration of the redemption, and it's re-experiencing the redemption from Mitzrayim, and therefore empowers us to bring about that the Geulah is going to come. That's emphasizing the obligation. That's a Torah obligation to eat matzah, which is connected with the redemption. Yesodem is even more so. Matzah of Shana Oichlin. Alfim Shleich speak with sex Shabbos Seinu Lahachim. Ad Shenigval Le'Melch Malcham Lachem Kodesh Baruch Hu Ga'olam. This statement that the Haggadah says, this matzah that we're eating, is because there was insufficient time of the dough of our forefathers to rise until the Eibishter revealed himself upon them and redeemed them. So the Rebbe explains, based on what Chassidus says, Yedua, it's known, Chassidus talks about it in many places. There are two types, two levels of matzah. Aleph, one level of matzah, shekoidim chatzos, that the Jewish people ate before midnight. Hamatzah, she'achlu b'nei Yisrael b'yosim b'golos b'Mitzrayim. It was the matzah that the Yidden were commanded to eat. In Parshas Boy, Moshe Rabbeinu got all the instructions about the Korban Pesach and how to do the Seder. This was all supposed to be done prior to midnight, before the Nigla Aleim Melech Malcham Lachem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ga'olam. So there was one matzah that wasn't about insufficient time to bake. There was one matzah that the Yidden ate because of the mitzvah. This is a lot of Mefarshim asked this question, including Mamar Chassidus. How do we say in the Haggadah that this matzah that we're eating because there was insufficient time for it to rise? The Yidden already were told by Moshe Rabbeinu, when they were told about the mitzvah of the Seder night, of the Korban Pesach, and to all dressed, ready to go, and putting the blood on the doorpost, all these different things. They were told to eat matzah. So why do we say that matzah zushon oichel mashum shlo yispik tzek shavasei? So the Mamor of Siddur explained there is two different matzahs. There is one matzah that they fulfilled as the mitzvah that Moshe Rabbeinu told them for Hashem. You bring a carbon Pesach, you eat matzah, you eat maror, you're dressed in your shoes, you're wearing your gartel, you have your stick ready to go. That's one mitzvah. Then the Haggadah, when it's talking about it didn't have sufficient time to rise, it's talking about a different matzah. Base. Matzah shel achre chatzos, a matzah shel b'nei Yisrael, but seisim a Mitzrayim. Matzah that the Yidden ate when they went out of Mitzrayim. But what are we saying by the Seder table? By the Seder table, we are looking, some people point, some people hold the matzah, at the matzah we're eating now, at the Seder table. And we're saying that this matzah at the Seder table is not commemorating the matzah that they ate before midnight, even though the matzah that we're eating now is before midnight. But the matzah at the Seder table that we're eating now is commemorating the matzah that took place after midnight, that there was Nigla Lev Melch Malcham Loch. The novelty is the matzah that we are presently eating before midnight. It is eating in commemoration and corresponding to the matzah, not the matzah they ate before midnight, but the matzah the Eden ate post midnight. A matzah she'achlu b'nei Yisrael b'tzeisim Mitzrayim, the matzah the Eden ate when they were going out of Mitzrayim. But the idea behind this is that the matzah that we're eating now is in connection with the matzah they ate when they went out. The matzah we are eating in a time of Geulah is not a Geulah matzah. It's not the matzah the Yidden ate in Geulah. He bedugmas hamatzah she'achlu b'nei Yisrael kaidem chatzos b'yosim Geulah Mitzrayim. It is similar to the matzah the Yidden ate prior to midnight while they were still in exile in Mitzrayim. But still, the apple became, even though it's similar to, because we're eating it before midnight, and at the same time, it still corresponds to the matzah after midnight when they went out of Mitzrayim. How come? What's the message of this? Even when we are eating matzah at our Seder table, last year, this year it will be in Moshiach, and the year before, we ate it in Geulah. That matzah we ate with in time of Geulah is still connected with and associated to the future redemption. That's why it's the matzah that's after midnight that we are commemorating Al Shum Shaloi Hispik B'Tzek Shalvaseinu with the matzah we're eating now. Lesson for this is Oizvav. The lesson for this is avoided by Yid. Even when we find ourselves in the general darkness of Geulah. Especially when a person knows about himself, his own spiritual level, what state he is holding spiritually. A person should not, heaven forbid, lose hope. But just the opposite. One needs to keep in their forefront of their mind and remember and recall about the redemption. Because by doing so, by keeping the Geulah forefront in our minds, that is the empowerment of the general avoid in the time of exile to bring about the future redemption. The Rebbe says, this is even more so after and in close proximity to the time of going out of Yitzias Mitzrayim, in the days of Sfiras HaOmer, that during Sfiras HaOmer, we know it's all about waiting and looking forward. We're counting the days to when we're going to get the Torah. Shebezman ze mudgish, in this time of Sfira, it's emphasized. It says that the going out of Mitzrayim was not only temporary, but it's emphasized. The Sfira Sa'omer emphasizes how there's all one connection between going out of Mitzrayim and the beginning of the giving of the Torah. So therefore, Allah has come how much more so during the time of Sfira. The remembrance of the redemption from Mitzrayim. It's also the beginning of the future redemption. It's expressed in the fact we are awaiting and we are looking forward to the completion of Matan Torah. And when is the completion of Matan Torah? And the revelation of the inner part of the Torah in the future redemption.